There was a man born in a log cabin so crude that the wind came through the walls in winter and the family slept on a dirt floor. His father was a laborer, a man who moved from one piece of borrowed land to the next, never owning a single acre of the earth he worked. His mother died when the boy was 9 years old. He had, across the whole of his childhood, less than 12 months of formal schooling combined. Every reasonable observer of his circumstances would have predicted the same life for him that every man before him had lived: hard work, modest return, an unremarkable grave. And yet this same man, born of nothing, trained by no school of any distinction, surrounded on every side by the settled certainty of ordinariness, would one day hold in his hands the fate of 30 million people. His name was Abraham Lincoln. What Lincoln broke was not merely the chain of poverty. He broke something older and more stubborn than poverty. He broke what I have come to call the law of social heredity, the invisible force through which most men are quietly sentenced before they are old enough to reason, to repeat the life of the generation that produced them. You are watching this because something in you has already decided to defy that sentence. I intend to show you, in precise and practical terms, exactly how that law works and exactly how a single man in a single generation can break it forever. Part 1. The invisible chain: what social heredity is and why it controls most men's lives. Some 30 years ago, while I was in the early stages of my research into the causes of success and failure among men, I made a discovery in the woods of Virginia that taught me more about human nature than a decade of observation in any office or drawing room could have done. I came upon a nest of a ruffed grouse, a ground bird common to those hills, situated near the edge of a clearing where I could observe it from a distance without disturbance. I watched the nest over several days until the morning the young birds hatched. And on that same morning, moved by curiosity, I walked toward the nest to see the newborns for myself. Now the mother bird, upon seeing me approach, did a remarkable thing. I want to pause for a moment and just speak to you, not as a channel, but as a friend, because something happened that I can't let pass by quietly. There are now 300,000 of us here. 300,000 people who decided this little corner of the world was worth their time. When I started, I could never have pictured a number like that. And honestly, it's not the number that gets me. It's the thought of 300,000 real lives, each of you on your own road, choosing to walk a part of it with me. I don't take that lightly for a single second. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I'm grateful for every one of you. Oh, and if you still haven't grabbed the free auto-suggestion sheet, go do that. I really think it could help you. It's down in the description. She spread her wings at an awkward angle, dragged one leg behind her, ruffled her feathers into disorder, and hobbled away from the nest in the opposite direction, performing with great conviction the appearance of a crippled and helpless creature. I recognized the trick. Mother birds have employed it since before any man was alive to watch them. I did not follow her. Instead, I went to the nest. The young birds looked up at me without the slightest sign of alarm. They were a few hours old. Not one of them had yet learned what a man was. I reached down and took one in the palm of my hand. It stood there, calm and unafraid, turning its small head to examine me with frank curiosity. I returned it to the nest and walked away. Some minutes later, the mother returned, gathered her young about her, and proceeded to give them their first lesson. She shook herself violently. She spread her wings and beat them in exaggerated agitation. She uttered a series of sharp, urgent sounds that, had I been able to translate them, would certainly have amounted to this: there are things in this world that will destroy you. This is what fear looks like. Remember it. By the time I observed that same nest again, the following morning, those young birds scattered at my approach. Not because they had been harmed, not because they had encountered any danger of their own, but because their mother had planted in their unguarded minds the full emotional signature of a terror she herself had learned from her mother, who had learned it from hers in an unbroken chain reaching back through generations beyond counting. I submit to you that this is a precise description of what happens in the homes of most human families. The mechanism is this. The mind of a child in its earliest years is open, plastic, and entirely without defense. It cannot yet reason. It cannot yet examine what it is told and weigh it against evidence. It can only receive, and whatever idea is planted in that unguarded mind, planted with sufficient repetition and with the emotional force that comes from the voice of a parent or authority, takes root in the subconscious with the permanence of a belief carved into stone. This process, which I call social heredity, is the true mechanism through which most men's ceilings are set before they are old enough to have built anything at all. I knew a woman, I shall not give her name, for the family is known who, whenever her young son misbehaved, would conclude her punishment with the same words. She would take him by the shoulders and say, "You're going to end up in the penitentiary before you are 20 years old." She meant it as a warning. She believed it was a form of correction. He was sent to a reformatory at the age of 17. The words did not predict his fate. They instructed his subconscious mind toward it one repetition at a time until the force of hypnotic rhythm made the instruction permanent. Now, I do not tell you this to lay blame upon any parent who spoke words in ignorance. The vast majority of parents who hand their children a limited vision of life do so because they themselves received that same limited vision from their own parents who received it from theirs. The chain is real. The damage is real. But here is the truth that changes everything. Social heredity is not destiny. It is instruction. And any instruction planted in a mind, however deeply, however early, can be recognized for what it is, examined by the light of reason, and replaced by a deliberate act of will. The man who breaks his family's pattern does not do so because he was born with gifts the others lacked. He does so because he is, often for the first time in his line, willing to look squarely at the instruction he received and say, "That belief was never mine." Part 2. The law that locks the chain hypnotic rhythm and why families stay stuck social heredity is the seed. But there is a second law, deeper and more powerful, which turns that seed into a permanent condition. I have given this law the name hypnotic rhythm, and I want you to understand it clearly, because without understanding it, you cannot fully appreciate why some men drift through their entire lives in the pattern their family established, and why breaking that pattern requires something far more definite than a vague wish for improvement. Here is how the law works. Nature, in her administration of all things, maintains a perfect balance. She does this through a principle of rhythm, a tendency to make permanent through the force of repetition whatever pattern has been established. Observe this in the physical world, and you will understand its operation in the mental one. The seasons arrive and depart with mechanical regularity. The orbits of the stars do not waver. A river running long enough over stone does not merely wet the stone, it carves a channel through it, and thereafter flows only in that channel, deepening it with every passing year. The mind of a man operates under precisely this same law. Any thought that is held habitually, any pattern of expectation, any settled belief about what is possible or impossible, any automatic assessment of oneself as worthy or unworthy of better circumstances, eventually crosses a threshold. On one side of that threshold, the thought is merely a habit, and habits can be changed. On the other side, the thought has become rhythm, and at that point, nature herself takes charge of its maintenance. The man no longer consciously chooses his poverty, his drift, his inaction. He simply is those things because his every thought, his every association, his very manner of breathing and walking and speaking has been organized by nature's own law around their perpetuation. Consider a piece of driftwood floating along a broad and quiet river. Moving freely, it may go in any direction the current takes it. But let it enter a whirlpool, and from that moment it circles endlessly. It does not choose to circle. It cannot choose otherwise. The pattern has it. This is the condition of the family that has for generations. I want you to understand what a drifter looks like, not in the dramatic fashion of a man lying in a gutter, but in the ordinary fashion that is far more common and far more dangerous, because it wears the costume of normalcy. The drifter has no major purpose in life that he has clearly defined and written down. He begins many things and finishes none. He criticizes those who are succeeding in their chosen calling, not from wickedness, but from the unconscious discomfort that their success produces in a mind which has accepted failure as the natural condition of existence. He reaches decisions slowly, if at all, and reverses them at the first resistance. He will work harder to avoid thinking than most successful men work in building their fortunes, and he will transmit every one of these habits to the children who observe him daily, not through deliberate instruction, but through the silent and irresistible force of imitation. Now, I must tell you the other side of this law, because it is equally true and vastly more important to your immediate purpose. Hypnotic rhythm is not evil in itself. It is a law of nature, and nature's laws are entirely indifferent to the direction in which they operate. The same current that pulls the drifter into the whirlpool will, if the man has established a different pattern of thought, carry him directly and with increasing speed toward the object of his desire. Success, as I have observed it among the hundreds of men I have studied, tends to multiply with less effort as time passes, not more. The man who has established a clear and definite purpose, who has impressed that purpose upon his subconscious mind through daily repetition and burning desire, finds that the law of hypnotic rhythm becomes his greatest ally. Nature begins to organize his circumstances, his associations, and his opportunities in harmony with the dominating pattern of his thought. The poverty-stricken man uses this law unconsciously to maintain his poverty. The man of definite purpose uses it consciously to build his fortune. The choice of which direction you point this law is the most consequential decision of your life, and there is only one force in human experience strong enough to interrupt a generational pattern that hypnotic rhythm has fully solidified. That force is a burning desire attached to a definite chief aim held in the mind without retreat until the subconscious receives it as an order it cannot refuse. I shall now tell you about the first man who breaks a bloodline's pattern and precisely how he does it. Part 3. The first man in the bloodline how. One man's decision can alter an entire family's future. I want you to consider a young man. He grew up in a household not of dramatic poverty, not of starvation or visible ruin, but of the quieter kind of poverty that is in some ways more dangerous because it is comfortable enough to accept. His father was a decent man who worked hard and expected nothing remarkable in return. The unspoken law of the household, communicated not by any single statement, but by the accumulated weight of 1,000 ordinary evenings, was this: we are not the kind of people to whom great things happen. The young man, upon entering the working world, began to drift in exactly the direction that social heredity had prescribed for him. He took the first position that presented itself. Quick one. If you want the money attraction law to prove itself to you fast, the 14-day money magnet protocol is designed to attract your first $100 in 2 weeks, or you get every cent back. Zero risk, real evidence. It's the second link in the description. Go grab it right now. He performed it adequately. He spent what he earned. He harbored, somewhere beneath the surface of his daily routine, a vague sense that something more ought to be possible. But he had not yet learned to translate that sense into anything definite enough to act upon. Then something happened that altered the entire course of his life. He came upon an idea. Not a large idea, a small one. A single, concrete, definite notion about how a particular kind of commerce might be conducted differently than it had been. He did not yet know whether the idea was sound. He did not have the capital to test it. Every practical man of his acquaintance told him, with varying degrees of kindness, that it would never work, that the established merchants would crush him, that his resources were too thin, that the timing was wrong, that he was reaching above his station. He wrote the idea down. He read it to himself every morning when he rose, and every evening before he slept. He spoke it aloud, in his own voice, with the full force of his intention behind it. He did not ask permission from those who doubted him. He did not wait until the plan was perfect. He began with what he had, in the only place available to him, at the only scale his circumstances permitted. Every man who observed his beginning predicted failure. The idea was a simple one, a counter in a general store devoted entirely to goods priced at 5 cents. Nothing above 5 cents. Nothing below. A ridiculous notion, said the merchants of his day. No man builds a business by limiting what he can charge. Who will come to a store that offers only the cheapest things? The world came. That man's name was Frank Winfield Woolworth. Born on a farm in upstate New York, told by his first employer after a trial period as a clerk that he had no aptitude for retail commerce. Woolworth held to his single definite idea, while every reasonable voice around him counseled retreat. He failed at his first attempt. He found a better location and tried again. He failed somewhat less dramatically. He refined his plan and tried again. He did not alter his aim. He altered only his approach, and he continued altering it with patience and persistence until the plan worked. By the time he died, his name was printed on the windows of more than 1,000 stores across 2 continents. His family had seen a dreamer. The world saw a conqueror. Now, I want to explain to you with precision exactly what Woolworth did in his mind that the drifting men around him did not do, because it is the same thing Lincoln did, the same thing every man does who breaks his family's pattern. And the same thing you must do if you intend to be the first in your line to build something that lasts. He selected a definite chief aim. I have studied this principle in the lives of hundreds of men, and I can state without qualification that this single act, the deliberate selection of a clear, written, specific objective, backed by a burning desire for its attainment, is the starting point of all achievement that rises above the ordinary. Not talent, not education, not favorable circumstances. Definiteness of purpose. Here is why it works in the precise mechanical sense. When a man selects a definite chief aim and writes it out in plain language, he gives his conscious mind a point of focus. From that moment forward, the conscious mind presents that aim repeatedly to the subconscious. The subconscious mind, which never sleeps, never rests, and operates with a power the conscious mind cannot match, accepts the aim as a commission and begins both by night and by day to direct the physical actions, the associations, and the opportunities of the man toward its fulfillment. The key word is repeated. The subconscious mind does not accept a single presentation as a command. It accepts what is given to it with emotional force over and over until the impression is deep enough to become the dominating influence of the mind. This is why I have always instructed that the definite chief aim must be read aloud morning and evening with feeling, not as a ceremony, but as a precise act of instruction delivered to the most powerful instrument you possess. Autosuggestion is the technical name for this process, but the principle is simpler than the name suggests. You become in the course of time what you repeatedly impress upon your own mind. Lincoln became what he held in his imagination through the years of his obscurity. Woolworth became what he kept writing and speaking and acting toward through failure after failure, until hypnotic rhythm took hold of his pattern of thought and made it permanent, this time in his favor. Now, I will tell you something that may be the most important observation I have made in 30 years of this research. The first man who breaks a generational pattern does not do so at the expense of those who came before him. He does not dishonor his father by exceeding him. He does not shame his mother by wanting more than she was given. He elevates the line. Every hardship those before him endured, every sacrifice they made simply to survive, these things contributed, whether they knew it or not, to the formation of the character that now stands at this particular crossroads, deciding whether to drift or to act. Lincoln did not shame the laborers who preceded him. He gave their suffering a meaning they could not themselves have imagined. You are that meaning for those who came before you in your own line. Part 4. The greatest enemy fear of criticism from those you love most must now address the most dangerous obstacle that stands between the first-generation achiever and his definite chief aim. It is not poverty. It is not lack of education. It is not the absence of opportunity. All of these are real difficulties, and all of them can be overcome by a man of definite purpose and burning desire. The most dangerous obstacle is this: the fear of criticism from the very people whose approval means the most. Of all the 6 basic fears that afflict mankind, and I have cataloged and studied each of them in careful detail, the fear of criticism is perhaps the most cunningly constructed because it arrives wearing the costume of love. It does not come from enemies. It comes from the dinner table. It comes from the mother who reaches out and touches your arm and says gently that she only wants you to be safe. It comes from the brother who calls your ambition arrogance and means it as a form of protection. It comes from the father who says nothing at all, whose silence communicates with the precision of a spoken verdict that he does not believe you will succeed. None of these people intend you harm. That is precisely what makes this particular fear so effective at its work. When Andrew Carnegie first put before me the proposal that I devote 20 years of my life to the organization of a complete philosophy of individual achievement, a philosophy that no man had yet assembled, my first impulse of thought was not excitement. It was fear. And the voice of that fear spoke in terms that will be familiar to you. What will your relatives think of you? Who are you to take on such a task? Remember where you came from. No one has done this before. What right do you have to believe you can? I later understood that those questions were not my own. They were the product of social heredity, the accumulated doubt of every generation that had come before me, speaking through the instrument of my own internal voice. I have observed this same phenomenon in the lives of hundreds of men who possessed sound ideas that might have made their fortunes, ideas which were, by any reasonable assessment, worth pursuing. I recall in particular the case of a man who had arrived at a clear and profitable notion about a specific form of commerce. He told me about it years after the fact, when it was too late. He had hesitated to act upon it because he feared that his neighbors, the men he saw at church, the friends who gathered at his table, would criticize him if he failed. He waited. He deliberated. He sought the approval that never came. And in the season of his hesitation, another man, a stranger to him, someone with no prior advantage, identified the same opportunity, acted without apology, and built a comfortable fortune with the idea that this man had been carrying in his pocket like an unspent coin. By the time I spoke with him, he had spent a decade watching someone else live the life his own idea could have given him. The fear of criticism, when it operates in the context of a family that has settled into a pattern of ordinariness, becomes the most effective of all the tools by which social heredity preserves itself. Because it does not need to argue with you. It does not need to defeat your logic. It needs only to make you hesitate long enough for the moment to pass, and the law of hypnotic rhythm will do the rest. I want to give you a clear distinction here because it matters. There is genuine counsel, the kind that comes from a man who has mastered the very thing you are attempting, who speaks from experience and wisdom, and whose advice is therefore worth examining with care. This kind of counsel is rare, and it is valuable. And then there is the other kind, which constitutes the vast majority of what is offered to the man of ambition by those around him. This is the counsel of men and women who have not attempted the thing, who have settled, who have made their peace with a smaller life, and who offer their doubts and warnings, not because they have any particular knowledge of your situation, but because your ambition disturbs the pattern they have accepted for themselves. Their counsel does not come from wisdom. It comes from social heredity, operating through them exactly as it operated through the generations that formed them. You must learn to classify these two kinds of counsel correctly. Failure to do so will cost you your life's greatest work. Now, I will tell you the specific and practical remedy for the fear of criticism, because this fear, like all fears, is not defeated by courage in the dramatic sense. Here's the gap between the people who manifest wealth and the people who only watch videos about it. The wealthy install the idea daily until the mind accepts it as already done. You can't do that from memory. You need it in front of you. That's why I made the free auto-suggestion sheet. One page, read it morning and night, and you start reprogramming your self-image around money. It's free at the first link in the description. It is defeated by a deliberate daily act of self-instruction. The development of self-confidence, the only antidote to the fear of criticism, begins with the elimination of that fear through auto-suggestion. A man who tells himself morning and evening in a clear and written statement that he is capable, that his purpose is sound, that he has mastered himself and will master the circumstances before him. That man is using the same mechanism by which social heredity implanted doubt in him, and he is using it to replace that doubt with belief. Not overnight, but steadily, with repetition, with persistence, until the new instruction becomes the dominating pattern of his mind. Self-confidence is not given to a man by his circumstances. It is not inherited from a family of achievers. It is built brick by deliberate brick through the daily practice of speaking to one's own subconscious mind with authority. And here is the most important thing I can tell you about the fear of judgment from those you love. You do not require their permission to become what you already know you must become. Their blessing would be welcome. Their understanding would be a gift. But you must proceed whether these things come or not, because the world does not reserve its honors for the man who waited until everyone around him was comfortable with his ambition. It reserves its honors for the man who acted. Part 5. The new bloodline begins today. The definite step, the new environment, and the closing charge. I have shown you the law that binds most men to their family's pattern. I have shown you the force that makes that pattern permanent. I have shown you the single act, the selection of a definite chief aim that begins its dissolution, and I have shown you the greatest enemy that will arise to contest that act. Now, I will tell you with complete directness what you must do. The bloodline does not change because a man wishes it to change. Wishing is not desire in the sense I mean. Most men wish for better circumstances, the way a man in a cold room wishes for a fire with comfort and at a distance, and without any particular intention of rising from his chair to build one. Wishing changes nothing. It is merely the exercise of imagination without the commitment that transforms imagination into result. Burning desire is a different thing entirely. It is the kind of want that occupies the mind constantly, that follows a man into his sleep and meets him again when he wakes, that makes patience with his present circumstances increasingly difficult. Not because he is discontented in a small and petty way, but because the vision of what he intends to build is more vivid and more present to him than the room he is sitting in. This quality of desire is not inherited. It is cultivated. And it is cultivated by the daily deliberate practice of holding the definite chief aim before the mind with the full weight of one's emotional and imaginative force. Here is the first practical step you must take, and you must take it before this day is over. Write down in plain and specific language the thing you intend to achieve, not a general aspiration toward improvement. A definite object, a clear result, a specific condition that you will recognize when you have arrived at it. Assign it a time, a date by which you commit before your own subconscious mind to have created the conditions of its attainment. Then read that statement aloud to yourself with all the feeling you possess every morning when you rise and every evening before you sleep. Do not omit the reading because you feel foolish. The feeling of foolishness is the voice of social heredity. The reading is the act of a man taking possession of his own mind. Now I must speak to you about the second step, which is the selection of your environment, because no man breaks a generational pattern in isolation. The most important part of any man's environment is not his physical surroundings. It is the minds with which he associates most closely. This is a precise statement, not a general encouragement. The law of hypnotic rhythm operates through association as powerfully as it operates through any other force. The man who spends the majority of his time in the company of minds that have accepted drift will, by the operation of a law he cannot escape, begin to absorb the thought habits of drift, however strong his individual resolve may be. Every word heard, every attitude observed, every settled expectation encountered in daily association acts upon the mind the way water acts upon stone, gradually, invisibly, and with cumulative power. The remedy is not to abandon your family in contempt. I do not counsel this, and I never have. The remedy is to select, with deliberate care, the minds you draw into closest alliance around your definite chief aim. Seek out the man who has already done something resembling what you intend to do, and learn from him with the humility of a student. Find the one associate, perhaps only one to begin, whose ambition is honest, and whose mind will harmonize with yours around a shared purpose. And build between your two minds the kind of friendly alliance in which each reinforces the other's resolve. There is a name for this kind of alliance in my philosophy. I call it a mastermind. Two or more minds coordinated in a spirit of perfect harmony around a definite purpose. The chemistry of two minds, properly aligned, creates a combined intelligence that neither individual possesses alone. This is not a figure of speech. It is an observable law. I observed it in the city of Chicago in the case of 6 men. none of them born to any particular advantage, who formed a simple alliance of mutual purpose and assistance. They met regularly. They shared ideas. They endorsed each other's efforts. Not one of them would have reached alone what they reached together. Their combined yearly income was said to exceed $25 million. Every one of them began in humble circumstances. Every one of them broke his own family's pattern, and every one of them did so, at least in part, by refusing to remain entirely isolated in his ambition. You need not begin with 6. Begin with 1, the right one. Now, I want to speak directly to the man who is watching this and thinking privately that it may be too late, that the years he has spent drifting have accumulated into a weight that cannot now be lifted, that the pattern is too deeply set, that hypnotic rhythm has already done its work beyond the point of recovery. I knew a man who was given, by the physicians who attended him, less than 1 year to live. He was confined in a prison to which he had been sentenced for the remainder of his natural life. His crime was real. His tuberculosis was real. He had not a single friend in the world who came to him in that condition and offered encouragement or assistance. His name was Louis Victor Aitken, and from within the walls of an Arizona prison, with no resources, no allies, no medical advantage, and no particular reason that any observer could identify for optimism, he made up his mind to defeat his disease. That was his definite chief aim, stated plainly and held without retreat. Within less than a year, the disease was gone. He extended his aim and determined to earn his freedom. The prison walls melted from around him. No environment is powerful enough to hold the man who has seized possession of his own mind. Not a prison, not a hospital, not a household that has carried the same pattern for 3 generations. Hear me now, because what I'm about to say to you is the most important thing I've said in all of this. The desire you carry, that uncomfortable, persistent, aching sense that you were made for something your surroundings have not yet accommodated, that is not arrogance. That is not ingratitude. That is not a sign that something is wrong with you for wanting what the people around you have not wanted. That desire is the most important thing you possess. It is the seed of your definite chief aim. It is the raw material from which all achievement is made. The question before you is not whether you deserve a different life than the one your family's pattern prescribes. The question is whether you will act with sufficient definiteness, sufficient persistence, and sufficient courage to build it. Write down what you want. Speak it aloud. Select one ally who will not drag you backward. Begin today. Not when the circumstances are more favorable, not when the family approves, not when you feel entirely ready. You will never feel entirely ready. The feeling of readiness is itself a product of action, not a precondition for it. The new bloodline does not begin when the last doubt is silenced. It begins when one man, in one decisive moment, refuses to let doubt make his decision for him. That man is you. That moment is now. Now, if you're ready to stop learning and start seeing evidence, I built something for you. It's called the 14-Day Money Magnet Protocol. 14 days, one simple ritual a day, and the goal is concrete. Attract your first $100 out of nowhere. And here's my promise. If it doesn't happen, you get your money back, because $100 isn't the point. It's the proof the law is working for you. Start it at the-second-.com/moneymagnet. Second link in the description.